There you go. Torrent is very faithfully always waiting for me to get the preliminaries out of the way. All right, today I'm going to read from Hebrews chapter 8. And anytime you read from Hebrews, of course, this is a letter. It's more like a sermon, really, because it's not addressed to anyone in particular. It's like a doctrinal sermon, sort of. And the writer in the early church fathers attributed it to Paul, the apostle, which makes sense, though he does not identify himself. At the end of the letter, he talks about being in bonds or being in prison, so that's one reason for thinking it might be Paul. But the thing you have to keep in mind as you read it is that it was written, addressed to, as the name of the book says, Hebrews. He's writing, that's who the writer has in mind. And Paul did that as well. Paul was Jewish, of course, and then became a Christian. And he was concerned, he had great concern, he tells us that in his letter to the Romans, of his fellow countrymen who did not yet believe in Jesus. And those who did, he wanted to make sure they stayed believing in Jesus. And that's what this is written. This whole book of Hebrews is written, addressed specifically to Jewish readers to encourage them to stay faithful to Christ and to it makes an argument that you have actually come to the fulfillment of everything the Old Testament was merely foreshadowing. And so it makes no sense to go back because you've come to the reality. You've come to the destination, and so why go back to the road that was leading to the destination, if I could say it that way. So that's what is on his mind. Now we, as readers that's not our background. We're not Jewish and not living in first century Israel, and some of the things that he's addressing himself to aren't really pertinent to us. Nevertheless, the doctrinal ideas are very important, and the fundamental things that he's sharing are actually very enlightening. And I find, just for me personally, that some of the things that he shares here in this letter to the Hebrews are key truths in understanding how to look at the entire scope of the Bible. So here, writing in Hebrews chapter 8, he says, this is chapter 8 out of about 13 or 14 chapters, and he's saying, now of the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. It sounds like he's kind of trying to conclude, and just like all preachers, just when you say, in conclusion, it's not really true. He's going to talk a lot more. But he's trying to sum up here. That's what it sounds like. Now of the things of which we have spoken, this is the sum. Or in other words, this is the bottom line, as we say. This is the point. We have such a high priest. Now this is referring back to something he said back in chapter 7, where he compared Jesus to this mysterious character in the Old Testament called Melchizedek. Melchizedek showed up in the story of Abraham. And the Bible doesn't tell us anything about where he came from, who he was, just this mysterious character named Melchizedek who shows up. And Abraham gave him tithes and showed him reverence and respect. And so this writer to the Hebrews, whether it's Paul or whoever, makes the point that this is like a foreshadowing of Christ, that this is what Christ is like. Because this priest, Melchizedek, did not come from the line of Levi. The priests in the Old Testament temple all had to be of the tribe of Levi. Jesus, of course, is not from the tribe of Levi, and he's making the point that in that respect, he's like Melchizedek. He's not an Old Testament priest. He's something new and different. So he says, we have such a high priest, like the one he had just talked about before, who is set at the right hand of the throne of majesty in the heavens. That's something you should always keep in mind, by the way. The Jesus that you're believing in, and the Jesus who knows you personally and cares about your life, he's seated at the right hand of God, a place of influence, if you want to call it that. And that's meant to give you a sense of confidence and assurance that when you pray, you have heaven's attention. Your prayers aren't just kind of going out in the air and going nowhere. You have the ear of Almighty God who already cares about you. And Jesus is there as a sort of a well, not sort of, he's our representative, if we can say it that way. Seated at the right hand, that's the place of influence, the place of authority and power. Of the throne of majesty in the heavens, he says, verse 2, a minister of the sanctuary, of the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched, not man. Now, when he says this, he's saying that Jesus is the minister of the true sanctuary as opposed to the physical temple that was on earth. As Paul or whoever was writing this, it was still standing in Jerusalem. He's saying that's not the true temple. That's merely a representation of the reality that is actually heavenly. So he's saying the real thing is heaven. The real thing is in heaven. And Jesus is the real minister of that true, he calls it the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched and not man. It's something that God has established. Verse 3 says, for every high priest is ordained to offer gifts and sacrifices, meaning the priests on earth in the physical temple that these Jewish readers, of course, knew all about. Wherefore it is of necessity that this man, meaning Christ, have somewhat also to offer. For if he were on earth, verse 4 says, he should not be a priest, seeing that there are priests that offer gifts according to the law. Meaning he's not like the priests that they were familiar with that go in and out of the temple and offer the animal sacrifices, because that was under the law, and as I said, they were of the tribe of Levi, and he's saying if this were an earthly thing, he wouldn't even be a priest. So we're talking about something heavenly, not physical or carnal. Verse 5, who serve, meaning the physical priests in the physical temple with which they were familiar. Keep in mind, it was all still going on. When this was written, that temple was still standing, and those animals were still being killed and offered as sacrifices. And by the way, right here in this book of Hebrews, if we turn over a couple of chapters, which we'll not do, but I'll just quote it, in chapter 10, he reminds his readers that it is impossible that the blood of bulls and goats can take away sin. All those sacrifices they were doing, it didn't do anything. It didn't produce anything. It did not take away sins. Yet God commanded them to do it until the time would come when the true sacrifice would come, which is the blood of Jesus, which did take away sins. So he says in verse 5, these earthly priests serve unto the example and the shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle. For see, saith he, that thou make all things according to the pattern which was showed thee on the mount. Everybody knows that Moses went up on the mountain and got the Ten Commandments. We've all seen that movie with Charlton Heston. One part they left out. You know, let me just tell you this. The book always has more than what's in the movie. That's true of every movie. The book is always better. The book always has more. Moses didn't just go up there on the mountain and get 10 commandments. God showed him a pattern for a tabernacle, so that, as he told Moses, that I might dwell among my people. And so he told Moses to go and build this thing with these very strict specifications, which, by the way, were all symbolic. And here he's telling us that was just a shadow of a reality that's in heaven. And I don't mean by that there's a physical building in heaven that resembles that. It means that there is a reality that is spiritual, that is symbolized by all the things that they did. We just mentioned the animal sacrifices and the sprinkling the blood on the altar. That's symbolic of the actual sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, in which his blood fulfilled what those animal sacrifices merely symbolized. So, going on, verse 6. But now hath he, that is Jesus, obtained a more excellent ministry. That is to say, it's greater, it's better, it's superior to these human priests we've been talking about. By how much more, in other words, in a greater way, greater than, like an example, but greater than those physical priests in the physical temple. He is the mediator. He is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises, meaning this new covenant. Now notice that he calls Jesus a mediator. Now a mediator is, what is a mediator? Well, a mediator is one who stands between two parties to resolve something. And that's what he says Jesus is, one who stands between us as human beings and God, who is, of course, God. There's a very interesting illustration, I think, of, and it gives this understanding of the need for and the function of a mediator. And it's in a book in the Old Testament that is kind of mysterious in its own way, and it's the book of Job. And Torrin, I'm going to read from Job chapter 9. I'm going to start with the very first verse. And let me just say as I'm turning there that the book of Job, some Bible scholars think that it is chronologically speaking, the oldest book of the Bible. The reason they say that is because Job, in the book of Job, there's no reference to any other part of the Bible. There's no reference to any other Bible characters. There's no reference to Abraham. There's no reference to the law. There's no reference to anything else that we read about in the Old Testament. Yet it contains a lot of very pointed spiritual truth. So whoever the characters are that are speaking in this book of Job, they seem to have a lot of knowledge of God, but it seems separate from or unconnected to any of the other revelation from Moses or from Abraham. So the speculation is that this book of Job was perhaps set down in writing before Abraham, before Moses, at a very early time in the story of the Bible. And you all know, of course, the story of Job, and I'm not going to go back and read it, but just to bring it to your memory, in the very first chapter of Job, it says that it calls them the sons of God, came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came with them. And he gets into this conversation with God, as Satan does, and he says, "Where have you been?" He says, "Well, walking to and fro upon the earth." And they get into this discussion about this man Job. And God commends Job and says he's an upright man and he's a good man. And Satan says, "Yeah, well, the only reason he's good is not that he's good, it's just you put a hedge of protection around him." And you know, they get into this little bickering kind of thing about Job, and Satan says, if I take away his blessing that you've blessed him with, he'll curse you to your face. And God said, "No, he won't." And it's like this little back and forth. Satan is bringing accusation. He's standing there talking to God, bringing accusation against this man on the earth. And this poor Job, they're up, these heavenly beings, Satan and God, are having this little, fight about it. And so Satan then is given permission to go and take away everything, all the blessings. And Job, see, he wasn't privy to that. He didn't know what was going on up there in that unseen realm. He couldn't see what was happening. And so when his children are killed and he loses his health and his income is taken, everything he has is blasted away. And so he doesn't know why this misfortune has come on him. And all of these chapters that we're reading here is Job, and then he has these three so-called friends who come along and are trying supposedly to comfort him, but what they really basically, if you read this, the friends of Job basically say, "You know what, Job, God wouldn't have done this to you." They presume God did it. "God wouldn't have done this to you if you were as upright as you claim to be. So, if you were really righteous, if you were really upright, God wouldn't have done this." And then Job says, "Yeah, well, we're going to read what he says in a minute." But Job didn't know. He didn't know it was Satan. He didn't have a revelation of that. And just, by the way, this is a little side thought. We read this a few weeks ago. That situation that we read about at the beginning of Job is not taking place anymore. Jesus said, "I saw Satan fall as lightning from heaven." Jesus said, now is the judgment of this world, now shall the prince of this world be driven out. He is not up there talking to God anymore. He does not have that access that we read about in the book of Job. The death of Jesus eliminated that. The only reason Satan could come into the presence of God is because of man's sin, because of Adam's sin. He had, you might say, a legal right, because everybody was guilty. So he was an accuser, and he went and accused them before God, just like this book of Job, but that's not the case anymore. Now you need to ponder this for a minute. How effective was the blood of Jesus? Did it do anything, or was it just like the blood of those bulls and goats that never took away sin? Well, I think the argument of Paul, or whoever it is writing the book of Hebrews, is that the blood of bulls and goats never took away sin, but Jesus, by the sacrifice of himself, has put away sin. He says that explicitly. And so effective. That's why Paul talks about the death of Jesus constantly in the cross. It was so powerful that it undid what Adam did wrong in the beginning. What Adam messed up in the situation that he created, Jesus more than undid it. What Jesus did on the cross was so much greater than what Adam did in the beginning, that it had the effect of removing Satan's access to God. And he is, as the book of Revelation says, cast down to the earth. And please don't think that everything written in the book of Revelation is something that's going to take place by and by after a while, sometime in the future. It's describing things that took place. It's a revealing of what Jesus did in many cases, especially this part of it. And he says that Satan is cast down to the earth, and he's running around down here, and he can't get to God anymore. So he brings his accusations directly to you, because that's the only place he can come. And you should just turn a deaf ear to him. You don't need to listen to him either. He hadn't got any power anymore. We talked about this before. But Job didn't know that. So I want to look at what Job says here in Job chapter 9. See, keep in mind, Job does not know why this has all happened. So in verse 1, in chapter 8, his friends have just got through telling him that this wouldn't have happened if you were really righteous, and God wouldn't have done this to you. And then Job answers, says, I know it is so of a truth, but how should a man be just with God? Well, that's a good question, isn't it? How does a man become righteous in the sight of God? How does a man get right with God? How can a man be in right alignment with God? Verse 3 says, if he will contend with him, he cannot answer him 1 of 1,000. In other words, if you're going to get in an argument with God, how do you hope to succeed? Because you can't answer him, not even 1 in 1,000. You can't contend with him. You can't get in a wrestling match with God, in other words. Verse 4, he is wise in heart and mighty in strength. Who hath hardened himself against him and hath prospered? In other words, how are you going to fight against God? He's strong and he's wise, and you'd be a fool to try to go up against God, he's saying. Verse 5, which removeth mountains that they know not, which overturneth them in his anger, which shaketh the earth out of her place, and the pillars thereof tremble, which commandeth the sun, and it riseth not, and sealeth up the stars, which spreadeth out the heavens, and treadeth upon the waves of the sea, which maketh Arcturus, Orion, and Pleiades. These are constellations in the sky. And the chambers of the south, which doeth great things past finding out, yea, and wonders without number. Lo, he goeth by me, and I see him not. He passeth on also, and I perceive him not. Behold, he taketh away, and who can hinder him? In other words, if he's going to come take something away, what am I going to do about it? Who will say to him, what doest thou? In other words, who's going to say to God, what are you doing here? Like you would to some human being. If God will not withdraw his anger, the proud helpers do stoop under him. How much less shall I answer him, and choose out my words to reason with him? See, Job is trying to answer and say, I haven't really done anything wrong that I know of. And they're saying, oh, well, you must be lying about it. You must have done something wrong. And what Job is saying here is, how am I going to go and make my case before God and try to present anything to him? He made the stars up here. He can say to the sun, don't come up, and it won't come up. And he can knock the mountains down. And he says, who am I to go and get in get in an argument with God. That's what Job is saying. It's like, I haven't got a leg to stand on, as we say sometimes. Verse 15, whom though I were righteous, yet would I not answer, but I would make supplication to my judge. If I had called and he had answered me, yet would I not believe that he had hearkened to my voice. In other words, I have no standing before this God who is so great and so powerful and so mighty. Verse 17, for he breaketh me with the tempest and multiplieth my wounds without cause. You see, he's mistaken here. As we read in chapter 1, Satan did all that. But he doesn't know. Job doesn't know. He's just pondering. He's trying to figure it out. Verse 18, he will not suffer me to take my breath, but filleth me with bitterness. He's talking about his experience here. He doesn't know what's happening. If I speak of strength, lo, he is strong. If of judgment, who shall set me a time to plead? In other words, I can't go into court like I could with a human being. There's no time that I can go in and, God, I'll meet you in court, on Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. I can't do that. Verse 20, if I justify myself, mine own mouth shall condemn me. If I say I am perfect, it shall also prove me perverse. I can't even make a case. He says, as far as I know, I'm all right, I'm right, but he'll find some fault, is what he's saying. Verse 21, though I were perfect, yet would I not know my soul, I would despise my life. There is one thing thereof, I said it, he destroyeth the perfect and the wicked. In other words, everybody ends up, under the same punishment of God. Verse 23, if the scourge slay suddenly, he will laugh at the trial of the innocent. This is not really true, but you can see how bitter Job is becoming here. Verse 24, the earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covereth the faces of the judges thereof. If not, where and who is he? Now my days are swifter than a post. They flee away. They see no good. They are passed away as the swift ships, as the eagle that hasteth to the prey. If I say, I will forget my complaint, I will leave off my heaviness and comfort myself, I am afraid of all my sorrows. I know that thou wilt not hold me innocent. If I be wicked, why then labor I in vain? If I wash myself with snow water and make my hands never so clean, yet shalt thou plunge me in the ditch, and mine own clothes shall abhor me. You get what he's saying? He's saying, I have no recourse. I can't answer. I can't even defend myself. If I try to defend myself, he'll know where the faults are. If I try to get myself as clean as I can, it's not going to come out right. Now listen to what he said. After all of this complaining and this confusion and this bitterness, look at what he says here. This is very profound, verse 32. For he is not a man, as I am, that I should answer him, and we should come together in judgment. In other words, he's not like me. He's not on the plane where I am. We cannot come together as equals in court. I can't take him to court. I can't settle this dispute between me and God.